Hello and welcome to the Saturday Morning Show. I am Jason Inman, and it's Saturday morning, and it's time to talk about nerdy and geeky stuff. And I thought of no better geeky guest than my friend Alex from Star Wars Explained. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jason.
Man, I'm so excited. So, real quick, in case some of my watchers don't know who you are, you run a channel called Star Wars Explained. I think it's pretty obvious what you talk about over there, but what can you explain a little bit more about what you do over there at that channel?
Yeah, I explain Star Wars. I basically do my best to keep up with all of the new comics and books and TV shows, and of course the movies, and talk about them, review them, go through all the connections with Star Wars Legends or the
Hmm.
current canon that each new piece of content has. Try to keep the universe tied together especially for people who are new to Star Wars, like if Solo was their very first movie and now they're wanting to dive into the world outside of the films. How do you do that? Because it can be very daunting. Like I'm playing that Spider-Man game right now,
Oh,
and
me
I'm
too,
like,
man.
gosh, I want to like read some Spider-Man comics, but there's so many, and I don't know what to do or where to get started. So it's like I try to help people like that.
I can hook you up with that. I can help you with that. That's pretty
We
good.
can
All right.
talk.
Thank you so much for joining me, man. This is very appropriate because Star Wars, of course, is a science fiction fantasy franchise. And if you don't know, right now on Kickstarter, my wife and I, Ashley Victoria Robinson, we are running our science graphic novel, sciencecomicbook.com. It is an 80-page original graphic novel about the most advanced science school in the world. It's already funded, so that means that if you go over there now, you can pre-order it and you know you're getting it live. You're gonna get it. It's not like we can't make it because it's already funded. So go over there, help us get some stretch rewards, and let's do all that because it ties into Star Wars. Speaking of other Star Wars stuff, Ian McDiarmid, uh, Alex, in case anybody doesn't know who Ian McDiarmid is, who is that?
That would be Chancellor Palpatine slash Emperor Palpatine.
What's his first name again?
Sheev.
I don't like that.
Yeah, it's
I,
funny when they announced that it was in the book Tarkin, and
mm,
people were like, "Sheev, like who let James Luceno make that name up?" And actually, apparently, it's been in notes for Star Wars for a long time,
oh,
and
really? It
I
was a
think
Lucas name.
right. So
Oh man.
I think that people were kind of blaming James Luceno for it. It's like, no, they had it written down. He probably asked, "What's his first name?" and they told him.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to the story of Coruscant. I know that the Legends material came up with the name of Coruscant. I believe was it who wrote the Thrawn trilogy? I'm trying to Timothy Zahn.
Timothy Zahn, yep.
Yeah, I believe Timothy Zahn came up with that, and George Lucas like reluctantly accepted that name because he didn't like it, but he thought that everybody knew it as that city planet, so he decided to take it.
Yep.
So, but Ian McDiarmid, the Emperor himself, was at a convention this last weekend, and he basically said that he thought that Episode 3 should have been a lot more eviler. And he talks about, in a quote, he said, "Of all the deliciously evil scenes, and there are many, the one that stands out for me is in Revenge of the Sith, and that's when we go to the opera. George Lucas originally wrote the scene in another office, and I said, no, I think we should go for a change, and blah, 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 blah." He's like, from my point of view, anyway, it was interesting that Hayden and I could have an evil chat, and I think it's one of the longest dialogue scenes in the whole saga. Now, I actually love that scene. I think that scene is one of the best scenes in probably the entire prequel trilogy, if not one of the better scenes in the entire saga, because you can see the manipulations of Palpatine, you can see the evilness, you get to learn a little bit about the Sith. But the thing that I really like about it is that Star Wars really doesn't let scenes just sit there and happen, and they don't let scenes where people talk. Alex, what did you think? Do you like this scene? Do you hate this scene?
I love that scene.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best showcases of just Ian McDiarmid. He's one of those people that just elevates every scene he's in. It kind of reminded
Yeah.
me of the X-Men movies when they were first coming out, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like every time Patrick Stewart or Ian McKellen were in a scene, it felt like this was something bigger than it had to be necessarily, and that's kind of what I that's the vibe I get with Ian McDiarmid, that he is just such a pro,
Yeah.
and I love every time he either gets to chew up scenery or be kind of calm and cool and manipulative like he does in the opera scene.
Mm-hmm. Now, his conversation led to what I thought would be an interesting idea to talk about today, especially with you as you run this giant Star Wars Explained channel. You understand Star Wars. Let's talk about Episode 3. Should Episode 3 have been darker? Now, I personally like Episode 3 because it feels like it ties the most into the original trilogy. It feels like the most like the original trilogy. I think there are some really great scenes in there. I think Anakin and Obi-Wan's final fight is pretty badass. And I even like the opening battle. I love this sort of touch of evil Orson Welles long shot that they do through the battle of the Clone Wars. Alex, what are your thoughts on Episode 3? Let me ask you that. Let's go with this. Is there any Star Wars movie you dislike?
No, I mean, I have favorites and least favorites.
Okay.
But even so, Attack of the Clones would be my least favorite, but it's still one that, I enjoy. I'm not going to not watch it.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about this idea. Episode 3, of course, had to do the big story turn of introducing us to Darth Vader. They had to explain why Anakin turned. They also, I think, had to tell us why the Clone Wars ended, and I think that's something they kind of bungled a little bit. I have a little bit of criticism because I don't know if I like that the Clone Wars happens in between the two movies, that the Clone Wars starts in 2 and the Clone Wars ends in 3. I almost wish that Darth Vader's birth was a little bit more tied into the end of the Clone Wars, because the Clone Wars just sort of stops because Obi-Wan shoots Grievous in the face. And then Anakin goes over and, kills the guys that hide away on Mustafar. But, I don't know, if the end of the Clone Wars is more tied into Anakin's fall, I think that would be a more epic thing. Because I don't know, for me, and I love the Clone Wars animated series, but I really feel that we got left out by not seeing a good chunk of the Clone Wars on screen because it had been mentioned, 20, 25 years ago. How do you feel about the way that they wrapped up the Clone Wars, Alex?
I think that's an interesting take, because I do think that you're right. I remember going into the prequel trilogy thinking that maybe Vader would have fallen by the end of Attack of the Clones.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Episode 3, he was just going to be running around hunting down Jedi, like Obi-Wan alluded to.
I thought that too. I actually thought that they might turn him in 2. Yeah.
Right. And the fact that it didn't happen until the end of Episode 3, I was surprised by that. But I guess I've felt that they did a pretty good job with the Clone Wars in my mind. I think you have a good point, but I still think that the prequel trilogy as a whole is the best representation of large-scale war and battles in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
That opening shot in Revenge of the Sith, it's like we haven't really seen anything like that in the sequel trilogy, for example. Just tons of ships all fighting all firing at the same time. I think that I'm hoping that Episode 9 gives us something like that. But
I will say that is very true. That the opening scene of Episode 3, just the thousands and thousands of ships. Yeah, we haven't seen something, and you would hope that was one of the things that I positively liked about the prequel trilogy, was the fact that the scale increased exponentially, and I do feel that is something that the new trilogy is kind of skewed away from. I blame that on J.J. Abrams. I think that was him responding to too much CGI, but I think there's a happy medium between the two. Let me ask you about this. Do you think, before watching Episode 3, do you think that Anakin's turn to Darth Vader should have been darker? Do you think the whole movie as a whole should have been darker? Because when you think about it, Anakin has some dreams. He's like, oh man, I think Padme's going to die, which is a good objective for him. That actually is a really good objective for him to turn. That explains that he loves Padme so much, he's going to do anything for her. But the scene where it actually happens, it's a good idea for a scene, the fact that Mace Windu is attacking Emperor Palpatine, but they don't really do a good job of selling why at that moment is the moment why Anakin turns.
Yeah.
Do you think that they could have done it? I mean, do you think this is the movie? Do you think these are the scenes that they should have gone darker? I mean, again, Darth Vader is, if you ask people out on the street, who is the most famous movie villain of all time? It's Darth Vader. Everybody says Darth Vader.
Yeah. I would agree that I think that his fall happens very suddenly. And
Hmm.
yeah, he cuts off one Jedi's hand and he's like, I guess I'm going to go murder children now.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, I think that that was pretty sudden. And I remember that I guess I never thought back when I was watching the original trilogy before the prequels were coming out. In my mind, it was just Anakin Skywalker was a Jedi Knight who uh, lusted for power and fell to the dark side, and that was all there was to it. So I don't know. I remember being a little bit surprised that there was so much about him just trying to save the woman that he loves. But I don't know. I guess as I've grown up, I've enjoyed it more,
Hmm.
or I'm more just accepted that like this is George's story to tell, and maybe that's why I've been so receptive to the sequel trilogy when some people are so angry about it. Where I'm like,
Hmm.
this isn't my story. It's just the storytellers get to tell it, and I will
Well, that's a
enjoy it. Or
that's a fair point. That's a very fair point. I think it's a fair point that we all forget is that we should be angry at. We shouldn't be angry at the story that we think they should tell. We should be angry or miffed at the story that did they execute the story they
right.
were trying to tell. That's the
And
idea.
that's and I would say that I think that the prequels do falter in execution a little bit.
Hmm.
Like now I have zero problem with the story being told. It's just yeah, I think that some of the decisions made behind the scenes, like, and these are well documented now on YouTube, but the
Yeah.
fact that so much of it was shot on green screen, and I feel like yeah, the performances are kind of wooden, and there were a bunch of consequences to using so much CGI.
Hmm.
So I think that some of the execution falters, and I do think that Anakin's fall could have been communicated better or set up a little more, made a little more gradual, which I think the Clone Wars series helps a lot with. But in the context of just the movies, it
Yeah.
seems awfully sudden.
Can I throw out a pitch to you because I've had an idea for the prequel trilogy for a long or like just slight adjustments that I think would really like hammer the same points home but make it much stronger. So
Okay.
I'm gonna throw it towards you. So I think in episode 1, Anakin should have been a little bit older. I think he should have been maybe 14, maybe 16, a little bit older, and I think that we should have seen him not be angry, but we should have seen that like, oh, he has a temper. Like you piss this kid off and he has a temper because I want to build towards the Darth Vader anger and hate. Because
Hmm.
Darth Vader's so hateful, he's so angry and again, I always thought that start with a kid that's like whoopee is the I want to see some tinges of Darth Vader in there. So first movie is basically the same. Anakin's a little bit older. He's not, he's 16. He's an angry teenager, and then Darth Maul dies. Episode 2, because we've moved ahead 10 years, right? There's no Count Dooku. Let's say Count Dooku is a title. And then the twist of the movie is that Count Dooku takes off his hood and it's Darth Maul with spider legs, just like Clone Wars.
Right.
Because I like the idea that the first time that Anakin sees a Sith is when Darth Maul leaps off his flying bike and attacks Qui-Gon. And when that guy takes off his hood and throws up a double-sided lightsaber, to a kid, even a teenager, even to a 14, 15-year teenager, that would like become a nightmare to you. And so I like the idea that like over the 10 years, maybe because of Force stuff, Anakin's been having nightmares about Darth Maul. And so he sees Darth Maul, he sees him as half machine to sort of build up the little tone, the forward idea to Darth Vader. He fights him, Darth Maul cuts off his hand. Very similar to Luke, very
Hmm.
similar. Like, and then when you get to the third movie, and it's Darth Maul whose head he chops off at the beginning. He finally gets to kill his nightmare, and he kills his nightmare by becoming more evil than his nightmare. Then I think that's a nice little like foundation for setting up Darth Vader. I always thought that Darth Maul was like the best thing about those prequel trilogies, and I was so mad that they killed him off in episode 1.
I was shocked when they killed him off.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, when you see him in the trailers and stuff, I'm like, oh, cool, this is the new Darth Vader. He's going,
Yeah.
like, we know that the Emperor is going to be
He
present,
looks so
but this will
cool.
be,
Yeah.
he's going to be our major antagonist that actually, our more active antagonist. And then he gets cut in half. But I think you bring up a great point because so much of Anakin's story is about the fear of loss, and I think the major story beats that lead to him becoming Darth Vader are he is separated from his mother and fears that he'll never see her again. He does lose his mother and goes off and slaughters Tusken Raiders, and that leads to the fear of losing Padme, and he wants to do everything he can to keep her alive. Darth Maul gets cut. He could still get cut in half at the end of Phantom Menace. Yeah, comes back with robot legs, and then we'd have Anakin seeing a Sith who has defied death, which Palpatine, says is possible through the dark side of the Force, which would lend more credence to that. And he can be, look at Darth Maul. He should have been dead.
Yep, dead on. That's a good way to tie that in. I never thought about that. Yeah, because he would be like, oh, there's the example. I could be like that guy.
Mm-hmm. He knows that it's possible now. I was with you with Darth Maul, and I kind of wish, as much as I love Christopher Lee, I wish that we had more of Maul and just kept him as a through line.
Well, that's the problem is that for me is that Count Dooku and General Grievous never live up to Maul. Like neither one of them, and you could tell that they were trying to get there with General Grievous, but they were like, okay, he's got 4 hands and they all use lightsabers. He's double the Maul, and you were like, no, he doesn't. Like he should have just been an interesting side character. Like because he is an interesting character. I like the fact that he coughs. I don't mind the idea that he steals Jedi's lightsabers and stuff like that, but setting him up as the big villain, you're just like, okay, all right. He should have just been a little side character. Another character that I thought I was surprised we didn't do anything with in Episode 3 is Asajj Ventress. I'm surprised they didn't. That's not the movie where we got to see her be a live action character.
It's interesting. I know that what's his name, Ian McCaig. He did all the concept art for Darth Maul, and he kept pitching Maul as a female Sith. And basically all of the designs that he pitched for Maul at first wound up being used for Asajj or Mother Talzin in the Clone Wars. But yeah, I think that in that first animated Clone Wars series, not the computer animated one, the 2D.
Yeah, the Tartakovsky.
Right.
If I'm saying that right, yeah.
Yeah, I always just avoid saying his name because I'm like, I'm going to butcher it. But I think that they were using Asajj, and then I think the plan was to have her be dead at the end of it because like Anakin kind of kills her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it would have been great to see her in live action. It's a shame that I don't think we ever will now.
No, I don't think we will ever again. It's sad. Let's talk about this. So you brought up an interesting point where we talked about how we both kind of thought that Darth Vader was going to fall in Episode 2 and that Episode 3 was possibly going to be all Darth Vader. It's funny. I remember when they first announced the trilogy as well, I thought that same thing, and I thought, it'd be an interesting story turn that if for the beginning of Episode 3, nobody knows who this Darth Vader guy is. Nobody knows. Because that's something that the Star Wars comics and Marvel are dealing with right now. There's a great series, Charles Soule, in his Star Wars Darth Vader. And it is dealing with the idea that nobody in the Empire knows that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker. Like, it's a secret. So it's the idea that if you play with that there's this Clone Wars general out there named Darth Vader, and he's working for the Separatists, and he's just killing left and right. And then you get to the confrontation that Obi-Wan realizes, like, oh, crap, that is Anakin. Like, that would have been an amazing story turn. But also, it's something that Rogue One showed me that I really feel that with even the late 90s special effects of the prequel trilogy, man, we should have seen Darth Vader being a badass. Like, actual... Because when you have the special effects like we saw in Rogue One, like, oh my god, he's terrifying.
Yeah. It would have been interesting if the fight on Mustafar took place at the end of Episode 2, and maybe it just very strongly hints that Anakin dies, and then in Episode 3, instead of Grievous, we had Darth Vader, but there's really no mention of him being... It would have been difficult, I think, for them to pull off, but what if they had found a way to at least make it vague, the fact that Anakin became Darth Vader, and it would still keep that mystery and that reveal in Empire. because now people are always questioning like, well, what order do I watch Star Wars in with someone new? Do I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6? It's like
I actually, to be honest with you, I like there's a name. It's not the Alamo order or something like that, but I like 4, 5, then 1, 2, 3, then 6.
yeah,
Because
I think
there
hatchet
is
order, machete order.
yeah, the machete order. Thank you. I was going Robert Rodriguez. I knew I was getting there somehow.
Yeah.
I like the idea that you meet Darth Vader as the villain, and then you go back and learn. Because I have found that once the prequel trilogies, when they completed, when you watch Return of the Jedi like takes on a completely different tone when you know who Anakin is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Do you have a preferred viewing order? Like, what would you suggest?
I always tell people, whether, because I get asked all the time, if it's the movies or the books, what have you. Maybe except for the comics, because they're a little more their own thing. But
you kind of have to read issue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't start at 10. Come on.
Right. I tend to just say read them or watch or read books in release order.
Yeah.
Because even if we're talking Rogue One, what came before still affects what is in that film.
Yeah.
So, like, you're not going to understand Rogue One as much. It won't be as impactful if you hadn't seen A New Hope. So if you watch 1, 2, 3 Solo, Rogue One, A New Hope, it's, I don't know. And same with Solo. You kind of need to see A New Hope to really, really enjoy Solo, I think. But yeah, I always go with the release order by, I don't know, chronological years. I don't know what to call that. But yeah, I go 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And then I would probably, if I were being true to it, do 7, Rogue One, 8, Solo, 9.
All right. We have a super chat in the chat right now. If you guys don't know, you're watching a live stream. There's a little $ below the chat. You can click that, and you can ask a question. And if your question will cut to the front of the line, we'll basically have to answer it because you paid us money, and we appreciate that. But this one comes from Raymond Verada, who's a longtime watcher of mine. Thanks, Raymond. Who says, "Who's Anakin's father? Is he like Rey's parents?" All right, so let's talk about that, Alex. I don't know. Have you ever done a video about Anakin's father?
Probably.
Yeah, you probably have. I would. You probably have done a video on everything in Star Wars. So that is episode 1. Shmi says that there was no father, that it's an immaculate conception. Do we believe Shmi, or do we not believe Shmi? Because it's something that is said in episode 1, and it's completely dropped. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I believe Shmi. I think that Anakin was born through the Force. Star Wars Legends, specifically the fantastic book Darth Plagueis by James Luceno.
That's a good book.
Goes into this a little bit. Yeah, I love Luceno stuff. And if I could keep one Legends book and make it canon, I'd do Darth Plagueis, because I feel like it just takes some of those baffling questions about the prequel trilogy and it makes sense out of them, and in a really great way. So I do believe, Shmi, that there was no father, that Anakin was basically born of the Force. And in Legends, they explained it as Plagueis and Sidious kind of messing with the Force and trying to knock it out of balance and push it more towards the dark side. It's not really clear how they were doing that besides meditating, but when they pushed it towards the dark side, the Force basically responded and was trying to balance things back out, and they created Anakin, and they created life. And Plagueis and Sidious kind of realized what was going on, especially when Sidious meets Anakin at the end of The Phantom Menace. He's like, oh my god, we made you, kind of. Or they didn't purposefully make him, but their actions provided this consequence. So I don't really think that that's still true. I think that it was just, Anakin was born of the Force. He was created by the will of the cosmic Force, and he is the chosen one for this generation.
I like that idea, though. It's interesting. I'd forgotten about that idea, that that's the reason why he was born. So the idea, you see it as the prophecy of the one who brings balance to the Force, is that when Anakin tosses the Emperor over the side, that's him fulfilling the prophecy just 20 years later.
Yeah, I think so. Creating balance in a way, and destroying the Sith, which was part of the prophecy. I was never really a fan of the prophecy trope. I just don't like that trope in general.
It's weird because the prophecy, I think, specifically states that it has to be somebody born of the Force, which it means it has to be Anakin. But in a lot of ways, and I like this argument actually, that a lot of people give the argument that it's Luke. And to be honest with you, I kind of like the idea that it's Luke that fulfills that prophecy, not Anakin.
Well, I see it as kind of like Neo in the Matrix,
Sure.
and we're led to believe he is the one, and then you find out later there have been a lot of the ones
Mm.
throughout the years. I think that there's more than one chosen one, so to speak. I mean, I think Anakin was chosen to do a very specific task,
Mm-hmm.
but I still think that Luke was chosen in a way. I think that Rey was definitely chosen. The Last Jedi novelization says as much. And Luke says something to the effect of like, "Oh God, what if a bunch of chosen ones show up to my island?" Like, I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
necessarily there's just one who what was one of the Darth Vader comics, the Charles Soule Darth Vader comics. They talked about the Force choosing vessels, and they are chosen to fulfill specific tasks. So yeah, Anakin was chosen to do this one specific prophecy, and I guess the Jedi wrote that prophecy down and were really like drawn to it. But I think the Cosmic Force does a lot of things beyond just that.
There is William Aguilar in the comments says, how much darker can you get after mass child murder, domestic abuse, rise of fascism, friend betrayal, genocide of an entire religion? Yes, all of that stuff does happen in episode 3, but it's the tone. It's very gentle, that stuff. Yeah, he chokes his wife out. That is domestic abuse. But then she dies because of a broken heart. She doesn't die because of the abuse that he actually gave to her. That would have made the movie darker. The mass child murder, it is implied. We don't actually get to see the effects that those murders have on Anakin. Anakin just goes in the next scene like, yeah, whatever, bup, bup, bup. You know, like if we'd seen... I'm not saying like we need to see children murder on screen. No way. That would never happen in Star Wars. I'd never fly in Star Wars. But imagine... You know, because we see that scene where the children see him light up the lightsaber. We cut away to Bail Organa, I think, flying in, I think is the next scene. And then after Bail Organa, what if we'd seen a scene where Anakin walks out of that room and then just slumps against the wall being like, oh my God, what have I done? That's the way you make it darker. And I think that would make it a much more richer movie. But I also understand at the same time, Star Wars is an adventure serial. And you can only push and bend that so much before it does break. I thought Rogue One did a pretty good job of like walking that line, but there were some points where I thought Rogue One pushed it a little too far, and then the movie didn't feel like Star Wars. Alex, let me ask you this: what do you feel like? Do you feel that every Star Wars movie sort of has to be an adventure serial, or do you think we could ever get the true, let's say, Saving Private Ryan, Clone Wars, Star Wars movie where we're actually dealing with the drama of these clones dropping left and right? Or even the drama of these clones being like, am I a real person because I was grown in a vat? What do you feel about this?
I feel like they can get there. I think that they need to, I don't know, slowly transition that way. And I think Rogue One was a good stepping stone where I wouldn't call it just a straight up adventure serial, not in the same way that the Skywalker saga has been. Solo felt more like the Skywalker saga to me, but no, I think that there's room for other stories, and I think there have to be, especially if they're going to give us a new one every single year.
Oh, good God! All right, let's pivot the conversation into that. Let's talk about the future. We know we have Episode 9. Is that correct? Episode 9 is the next one coming out. Let's say it's the Final Jedi. Let's say that's what it's called.
The Last Jedi. Seriously, we mean it this time.
Yeah, seriously, we mean it this live. Oh, by the way, Luke is a ghost. What do you feel? Where do you want this trilogy to go? Because it's interesting enough. I remember having this conversation actually with John Roca before The Force Awakens came out. And John Roca, a good friend of both of ours, Collider, Schmodown. And we were talking about that when Disney announced their first Star Wars plans, me and him kind of made the prediction that, and I did especially, that Star Wars was going to run out of ideas, or Disney was going to run the franchise into the ground by 2020. By 2020, we were going to have a bomb Star Wars movie. Like they were going to bomb a Star Wars movie. We're in 2018, and that happened. You know, they've done it with their stories. So where do you feel, or where do you want Star Wars to go? You love Star Wars more than I do. I think you love all the movies way more than I do. As you're the fan that they're going for, more so than me. where do you want the franchise to go after Episode 9? Do you want them to stop stories altogether? What do you want the next trilogy to be? I'd just love to hear your general thoughts.
Yeah, the Star Wars stories are a hard thing to balance, and like Solo was something that I walked out of the theater and I was like, good enough. Like I could enjoy seeing one of those.
But isn't that a problem
every year.
when you say that with a Star Wars movie?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I feel like the prequels were. I was young enough that I pretty much enjoyed them, but
I did too. Walking out of the theater, I will admit that I walked out of the theater, all the prequels being like, yeah, and then there was like on subsequent viewings being like, oh. But
right.
Continue. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I kind of feel like if Star Wars can survive the prequels, like they can survive wars. And that's not. This is coming from someone who, I like the prequels. It's just that like when you see backlash, like you did, or like we have with The Last Jedi, I'm like, if you're gonna get one movie every year, you're not gonna love every single one of them.
Yeah.
And honestly, I haven't liked any of them as much as I've liked The Force Awakens. I don't know what it was about that one, but I just fell in love with it. And the three that followed so far, I enjoyed them all, but just not as much. There were moments in each of them where I was like, holy crap, this is amazing, and some of my favorite Star Wars stuff, but the whole story didn't grab me as much as The Force Awakens did. But I don't know. It's a hard thing to balance with the Star Wars stories, I think, because they are smaller, and I think that if they were to just go with a smaller budget, like basically if Solo didn't have to be shot twice, I think it would be a bit of a different story. It still didn't make a ton of money, but at least it wouldn't have just straight bombed as hard as it did. Because there are some stories that I want to see, like Kenobi.
I want to see Kenobi.
No-brainer. Everybody does.
What's the other one you said? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say Kenobi, and that's it.
Like, okay. Because I want to see Fett. Like, that's a movie, or at least Bounty Hunters.
Right. Bounty Hunters, it's weird. When people describe these movies to me, when I first heard about Solo, I was just like, I don't know. But then when you start to hear it's going to be like this Western heist adventure, when you start to hear about it, then I'm like, okay, I'm more into that. If someone tells me we're going to do a Boba Fett movie, I'm like, but if they say it's going to be like Suicide Squad, but good, then I'd be excited about that, where, you have Fett and IG-88 and Dengar and Bosk, and like they're all, I don't know, something like Smoking Aces competing for the same bounty.
Did you read, by the way,
like that.
Did you read Kasdan's son, Lawrence Kasdan's son, I believe is John Kasdan? Did you read, so he tweeted out the other day his 50 thoughts on Solo?
And he mentioned Bosk a couple times.
Yep, and he mentioned Bosk was in the original cut, and I was like, no, why?
Yeah, that would have been cool. But yeah, like the Star Wars stories aren't what I'm as excited about.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe they'd be great on the streaming service, potentially, but I'm more interested in the Rian Johnson trilogy and the Benioff Weiss series, whatever that's going to be. I'm still thrown off by the term series.
Yeah, whatever either one of them are going to be, because you kind of have to say that neither one of their trilogies will probably be episodes. They'll be whole separate things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Episode 9 should be the end of the Skywalker saga, at least for a while. I would like them to wrap up this story, because I think they need to go in a different direction. I think that some people had so much trouble with The Last Jedi because they felt that characters that they loved for 40 years have been disrespected. I don't necessarily feel that way, but I can see why they're having trouble. And it's like, all right, well, if we just go and tell another really big story about the Mandalorian Wars, or just a huge Jedi versus Sith thing set 4,000 years ago, like Knights of the Old Republic, I think that
where's that story, man?
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's another story where I'm just like, and I know it's another prequel, but it's so far removed.
Yeah.
It's show us the glory, because even in the prequels we don't get to see the glory days of the Jedi. Like, so let's see the battle of 1,000 Jedi and 1,000 Sith coming at each other.
Yeah, let's go in, and there won't be any baggage from any other existing characters. Unless we get like a newborn Yoda 1,000 years ago.
And you could have one of the characters, like, you do it towards the end of the third act, like, what's your name? And he's like, oh, Tubadiboot Skywalker. Like, and then be like, oh man, So I agree with that. Like, there's a lot of different ways to go. I agree with your thoughts about ending the Skywalker saga. Let me throw something out to you, because what I think really helped the prequels was the release schedule. Every Star Wars movie that was made by George Lucas had 3 years in between every movie. And the 3 years actually gave you an interesting idea. So you would walk out of that first year, and over that first year, you'd be like, maybe I didn't like it as much as I did. The second year, you would forget about it. You completely forget about it, because you'd be like, when's the next one coming out? I don't know. And then the third year, they would release a trailer at the beginning of that third year. It would knock your socks off, because you'd be like, oh man, there's a Star Wars movie. And you would have a year of excitement to build up to the new movie. So because of that dip and then excitement, we got to be excited about Star Wars again. What I think happened with Solo is because it was less than 6 months from a not 100% positively received Star Wars movie. I think people were not willing to take the chance. They were like, I didn't like the last one, forget this one. And also, there was no chance to build up the excitement. There was no chance. There was no chance to get enough distance from Last Jedi to be like, maybe I'll watch Last Jedi again. Because it always happens with every movie. Like, even if you really hate a movie, but it's something you love, you'll give it another chance. What do you feel about... I don't think we need a movie every year. I get Disney's like, we got to make $1 billion every year. But even if we stretch it out to one every 2 years, I really think it would help. It would help these movies be more special. Also, it would give them more time to come up with better stories. What do you feel about that?
First of all, I totally agree that there was just not enough time between The Last Jedi and Solo.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even me, I remember going in to see Solo the first time, and I was like, I just don't feel ready for this. Like, I missed it being in December and having that year to take a break and build up hype. And yeah, we didn't get our first trailer until February.
Yeah.
And it was just, the marketing was so rushed on it because they didn't want to step on the toes of The Last Jedi, so they couldn't start promoting Solo earlier.
Yeah.
And I just think all that was a mistake. I wish that they had pushed it to December and really built up the marketing a little bit more, because even I was just like,
really, again? Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember when they first announced it, I was like, 1 a year, but make it 2 a year. And now I'm like, okay, no, I can't handle that. So 1 a year I still think is a happy medium, especially with these stories, if they were to continue to do them. For the bigger movies, I wouldn't mind if it went like let's say Benioff Weiss series, if they had a movie and then 2-year break and another movie, 2-year break. That would be okay with me. Like, if we were able to spread out some of these bigger stories and build up those individual hype levels a little bit.
Exactly.
And something I am not crazy about for the sequel trilogy is the fact that it seems like they're kind of making it up as they go. And while that worked for the most part for the original trilogy, I mean, I don't think that Vader was Luke's father in A New Hope. I definitely don't think that Leia was Luke's sister in A New Hope or Empire.
No.
I think they were just kind of making all that stuff up. And I don't know, while it can work, I just don't think that we live in that same age. Like, now we're in a post-MCU world where audiences kind of expect these big sprawling plans. And
you know the reason why I think it worked, though? Because it was all coming from George. Whereas now it's coming from a committee.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It was one person's unified vision, and the sequel trilogy is going to be probably JJ's and then Ryan's and JJ's again, with a mixture of committee.
Yeah.
So I'm more hopeful for Rian Johnson's trilogy and the Benioff Weiss series, that I think that it will be a unified vision for those stories. But the sequel trilogy, it's like, these are our Avengers movies.
Yeah.
They should have been, I don't know, planned a little better, I think. Instead, Disney was like, we just bought Star Wars. What's going to make the most money the fastest? Episode 7, let's launch it. Thank God I loved it. And while I still like The Last Jedi, it just didn't feel as cohesive. And now I'm like, I mean, we have to see Episode 9 before we can pass judgment. But I remember walking out of Episode 8 like, what's even going to happen? Which part of me is like excited about that, having no idea where it's going to go. But another part of me was like, that kind of felt like the end of a trilogy almost. And I just don't know
where you
where they
go.
can head. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got another super chat from Jonathan Peck. Thank you so much, Jonathan Peck. He said, question for you both. What are your thoughts on John Kasdan's release some notes on Solo's production on Twitter? Are there any facts from Twitter that stand out from that? So, Alex, I'd love to hear your thoughts. We talked a little bit about Bosk. Was there anything in all his 52 revelations that stood out to you?
I'm trying to run through them, the ones that I'm remembering. I mean, I was a huge fan of the old Tag and Bink comics, so
Yes.
when they announced all of that like Tag and Bink are going to be in the movie, and I never thought they would have a big part. But then they didn't make it in the movie, and then now you can see them in the deleted scenes where they're just in the background.
I will say I was personally let down by that because I'm friends with the creator of Tag and Bink. And so
yeah, Kevin Rubio.
To see his joy and then like, oh, they're not in the movie. Like it was these Facebook posts where like, and I love Kevin, he's so awesome. And I kind of also wanted him to get I wanted to get him some royalty money, you know?
Sure. And yeah, shout out to Troops. That was like my first Star Wars fan film I ever saw, and I loved it. But yeah, he basically was talking about Tag and Bink, and I just laughed at the fact that he was like, they wound up as junior officers because of a clerical error and they fell asleep in the wrong office. And I was like, it's stupid, and it probably
sounds like
isn't real,
Tag and Bink,
but it made me laugh.
The other one I remember is
popping out to me.
He talked about tying it in very much into Lovecraft. There was a lot of H.P. Lovecraft stuff, which I was like, I didn't see that in the movie. So it was interesting that they were talking about there were all these scenes that they wanted to tie into H.P. Lovecraft. I do appreciate the ties into the original trilogy, like where the suit of armor that Lando wears in Return of the Jedi, like this is where they got it. I'm fine with that. Sure. And I remember them saying that they looked at the Mission Impossible films a lot to come up with the Kessel Run, which I will say this. I remember when they first announced Solo. And the one thing I remember saying before they released it was, I hope they never show us the Kessel Run because it's so mythical that no matter what they show us, it'll never live up to expectations. Mm-hmm. But in my head, I knew they were going to show it. I was like, they're going to show it. For me, it didn't live up. I was like, okay, it's a cloud, and then he just turns left, and that's how he does it, and flies through a monster. Oh, all right. That's one of those things where being told about something, and this is a problem with prequels as well. A lot of movie studio Hollywood prequels as well. We don't need to see it. We don't like. I didn't even need to see the card game where Han won the Millennium Falcon. I didn't need to see that. I knew he did it. You know. Okay, cool. But what did you feel about the Kessel Run being basically the big climax of this movie? Well, I guess there's another climax, I guess, later on Severine. But, I mean, it's definitely the big action piece is the Kessel Run.
Right. I didn't mind that. I actually quite liked the way that they handled it because I've always been a fan of
Space Worms?
In Star Wars Legends, they do this thing where Han does the Kessel Run, but his instruments get all messed up by the black holes. And basically he's like, look, we just did it in under 12 parsecs. And Chewie's like, I don't know if we can trust our instruments.
Oh, I love that. That's very Han Solo.
Right. And so when he gets to Savareen and he's like, well, first of all, he tells someone, I just did the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs. And the guy just rolls his eyes and walks away. Like, nobody cares. I love that. And then when Chewie roars something, he says, not if you round down, buddy. So they kind of still did that, which I appreciate, where he more did it probably in 12.9, and then it becomes 12, and then in A New Hope he says less than 12 parsecs. So he keeps embellishing this. So I did enjoy the way that they handled that, at least. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's just in your mind. I guess it isn't ever going to live up, but at the same time, it was fairly similar to what happened in Legends and what I was prepared for, I guess. There was an Imperial blockade. They had to turn around, and they just went through all this dangerous stuff, and they made it out the other side. But
and that is one thing that I have been appreciating, that the stories and the story group have been pulling in a lot of stuff from the EU, like Thrawn and these little touches and stuff like that. All right, I want to cap off this live stream here, even though we started off on episode 3 and that's what the title is about. But people, this is a conversation. The Saturday morning show. Saturday morning, we're talking nerdy stuff. It's all good. Alex, I want to hear your thoughts. So we know we're getting episode 9.
Mm-hmm.
Based on your expertise, based on everything you know right now, what do you think is the next Star Wars movie after episode 9? What if you were to put a bet down right now? What do you think is the next Star Wars movie?
I guess I'm still hoping for Kenobi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they never ever confirmed it, but there have been so many behind the scenes, like little production kind of leaks that I'm like, I think they were definitely working on it.
Yeah.
And it just makes so much sense. Everyone would be thrilled if they announced it. Everyone wants more Ewan McGregor's Kenobi.
Yeah, and the actor is game, and he's still age appropriate, and yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping for. Whether it happens or not, like I'm putting money down just because I'm that hopeful about it.
Yeah, sweet. I like that. We'll have a little bit more conversation after we do all the plugs. Alex, thank you so much for joining me. Where can they find you? Tell them where they can subscribe so they can learn more of your Star Wars knowledge.
Our main place is on YouTube, Star Wars Explained. Me and my wife run the channel. I think it's linked in the description.
It is.
Or you can just search Star Wars Explained and we'll pop up. And on Twitter, we are at Star Wars Explained.
Go over there and follow him, everybody. And also don't forget to go support our graphic novel, sciencecomicbook.com. It's over there. It's already funded. It's pre-ordered, and it's all about science fiction goodness. There's no Jedis in it, but there are lots and lots of robots and possibly aliens. So nobody lies about a Kessel Run in my book, so just go over there. Final question for you, my friend. You brought up Kenobi, and I just want to know this. Obi-Wan Kenobi is my favorite Star Wars character. That's why I would be super excited for Kenobi. Who's your favorite Star Wars character?
Biggs Darklighter.
Really? Biggs Darklighter? Yeah. That's one you don't hear.
Let me see if I can position my camera. But
do you have a Biggs Darklighter shrine? I'm waiting for this.
It's behind the ring light back there. But yeah, I've got his helmet. Let me just pull this down. I've got his helmet. I've got his Funko Pop. Like basically every Biggs product that's ever been made.
Why Biggs?
He kind of represents something to me. Back when we didn't have deleted scenes.
Sure.
And I was watching Star Wars, and then you start to put together, well, you'd see images of this deleted scene with Luke and this guy with a mustache and a cape on Tatooine. And that was my first introduction into the idea that you would shoot something and then not put it in the movie, because I was 8. And just be like, well, why is this not in the movie? And then I was like, oh, that's that guy. Yeah, it's that guy at the end of the movie with the mustache that dies to protect Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And it just baffled me that it wasn't in there. And I was like, I have to see these deleted scenes. And so I just started trying to find out where I could before YouTube or DVDs existed. And it was on the CD-ROM, and you had to like unlock it. And me and my friend spent all this time doing it, and we finally did it. And then the scene isn't even that good.
No.
But in doing all of that, I learned a lot about Biggs, and it just was kind of the introduction to me that everyone in Star Wars has a story to tell. And so that's kind of what Biggs represents to me. And it's partly just like a hipster joke where like, my favorite character is Biggs Darklighter, but it's also... It wound up being kind of perfect because you can get like literally every piece of Biggs merchandise ever in an afternoon on Amazon.
Yeah, because there's like 12 of them, right?
Yeah, right. And then he occasionally pops up or gets mentioned, like just enough to keep you celebrating. So now it has become this fun game of like, oh, young Biggs was in this comic, or like from a certain point of view, when that book came out, it was like, there's a story about Biggs, and I get to be excited about it. And now it is genuine excitement.
Oh, that's really cool. I like that, man. All right, sweet. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Biggs Darklighter for existing.
And your sacrifice.
Alex, thank you so much for being on the show. This is a lot of fun. Oh, and if you want to hear more Alex, you want to hear more Star Wars stuff, go to patreon.com/Jawan. We'll have the after show for this right after it. It's going to be asking all these Star Wars questions of Alex. We're going to be going deep into his brain. But thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a good Saturday morning and a good Saturday day. Bye-bye.